Hello there and welcome back to another video here on Wrist Watch Revival. My name is Marshall. Thank you so much for coming along. This time on the bench, we have this really lovely pocket watch from the late 1800s. This one belongs to a friend of mine, and it's a family heirloom. It was passed down to him, and he asked me if I could take a look at it. It's beautiful. As you can see, it has some really cool engravings going on the case. You can see there's a little, I think it's like a little fishing village maybe engraved into that spot there, which would make sense. My friend is originally from Alaska, and perhaps, maybe he had family members. This side doesn't look like anything was engraved into that little area. You can put initials there or whatever. It was really common to do so. Let's take a look at the dial. Oh, not too bad, actually. Everything seems to be intact here. It says American Waltham, which was one of the biggest pocket watch manufacturers of its time. Ooh, there's a hair there. Yeah, that's not good. We'll just take that out of there because it's going to bug me, but everything's going to get cleaned anyway. Oh, there's another one too. Oh, lovely. Also, by the way, this also means that there's no crystal on the top of this thing. So we've already got one item on our list to fix, and that's what we're going to do today. I'm really glad you're here joining me for this little journey. This is my hobby. It's watchmaking, and I like to restore watches like this. It's a little piece of history, and of course, these objects carry with them a lot of sentimental value and things that go beyond the normal money and that kind of stuff. Take a look at the movement. Beautifully decorated movement. It is wild to me how common you can find these type of movements. Here's the case. It says, you can always see it says guaranteed 20 years. That means that this is either gold plated or gold filled. They're a similar process. And the process is you take, a base metal like brass, and then you plate it with gold using a chemical or electro process. It depends on how they do it. But at any rate, that's what we have here. This isn't solid gold. This is a more typical gold plated or gold filled watch case. But yeah, it is wild to me. The reason that you can find these type of movements on eBay and elsewhere for the price that you can, oh, look, the keyless work still works, so that's good. It is because these were mass produced, and I'm talking about mass produced movements. Now, any individual one, maybe not so much, but in this case, the American pocket watch scene in the late 1800s to early 1900s was absolutely booming. I mean, if these were more rare, they would be worth a ton of money because these are extremely well made. They're gorgeous, and they have a piece of history attached to them too. And the only reason that we can get them for the prices you can, which by the way, you can get movements, and that's without the case or anything, $50 on eBay all day long, $100 for a nice one. I mean, it's crazy that you can get this type of stuff for the prices that you can get it. And I often recommend, by the way, if you want to start with watchmaking as a hobby, that one of these movements can be a good place to start because they usually don't have a case anyway, so you don't have to feel too bad. But they're really well made and they're big, so you can actually see what's going on. I'll take the bezel off here. Again, that's where the crystal is going to go in. And we're going to have to find a crystal to replace the missing one. As you can see, the watch actually has now started up, which is pretty cool. It wasn't really running much when it was handed off, so that's really good news. It could have been that hair around one of the hands or something could have been holding it up. I'm not really sure. We're going to completely disassemble this movement and the whole case and everything, clean it thoroughly, and then we'll be putting it all back together just the way it went back, hopefully, and see if we can get this thing running and operating well. Take a look at the dial. You can see there's a little bit of damage, some cracks on there, but overall, nice. These dials are made of enamel. They're used with, they're manufactured with enamel, and it lasts for absolute ever. We can start taking apart the dial side of the movement here. This part's usually pretty straightforward. This is the cannon pinion coming off here, and this is what we call the motion works. It's the part of the watch that controls the hands. So that's, obviously important for us human beings. It's a weird thing because you can actually make a watch that runs perfectly but doesn't display the time, right? You need that aspect of it so that we can actually see the result of a perfectly running watch. We'll start by taking the balance off. On these old watches, if you look at the top of the balance, there's no shock spring. There's no type of protection for if these things were to be dropped. It would be very common for parts to break in there. This watch was manufactured. You can look these up, by the way. There's a website called the Pocket Watch Database. And if you can get the serial number of the movement and punch it in, they often have detailed information. This one says that it was made between late 1892 and early 1893. So that's the manufacture date for this particular movement. This one has 11 joules as it was manufactured. I don't know how to let down the mainspring, so I'm just going to have to take out the pallet fork. It kind of jumped away, but thankfully didn't jump too far for me there. That's not the preferred way to do it. You'd rather try to let all the power out of the mainspring first. Now we can take off the train wheel bridge. And again, look at that decoration. I mean, it is lovely, this thing. This was manufactured in a time where basically everybody had a pocket watch that needed a watch. It was not fashionable for anybody at this point to wear wristwatches. They did become popular mainly with women first. And then during the First World War, a lot of the combatants wore watches. You know, they called it trench warfare, right? You were sitting around a lot in the dirt, and having a pocket watch just wasn't really practical. So they would start to modify them and strap them to their wrists using leather or metal or something like that. And you can actually find these. Oh, it looks like there's a bit of oil there on that. So at least somebody attempted something on this watch. It didn't look too bad, though. But anyway, and then when they came back, men were more accustomed to using a watch on the wrist. And we kind of never looked back from there. And it looks like the ratchet wheel is attached to the bottom of this barrel assembly here. This is just kind of the little weird stuff that you get from a watch from a different era when things weren't designed all exactly the same. And yeah, you can see the barrel has 3 parts here, which is what I would expect. That's the barrel arbor. And then there's a lid. I see. So the lid actually has the arbor on the inside of it that will attach to that mainspring. That's an old school mainspring. That unlikely to be the original mainspring. They were changed out fairly frequently, but that is not a modern one. And by modern, I don't mean like the last 10 or 15 years. I mean like the last 50, 60 years. So that's an old mainspring in there as well. This is where things get a little weird. This is the keyless works, but this does not resemble any keyless works that I work on wristwatches, which is kind of what I primarily do. And I don't think I've seen one quite like this on a pocket watch yet either. I can see that this is meant to slide back and forth and has a couple of springs to keep it under tension, which makes sense. If it's attached somehow to the yoke, then this is kind of a elaborate yoke spring. And I'm curious if that's the case. These are shouldered screws that give this part a little bit of wiggle room. Yeah, I can actually see. So right there on the bottom that's attached to it, that's the yoke. Okay, so this makes sense. There's kind of a translation layer you have to do if you're used to working on wristwatches or perhaps more modern watches. And okay, I see. This pin goes all the way through to the other side. This is a weird one for sure. This is, when I'm taking this type of thing apart, this is where I usually make a little mental note. Does this want to come out? Okay, yeah. Then I'm probably going to have to go back and look at the video again to kind of get an idea for how this whole thing actually goes back together, because this is not what I'm used to. Some of it is, you know, that's a sliding clutch. That's on every watch I work on. Or clutch wheel, that's a sliding clutch right there. But yeah, a little bit different. And by the way, you know, I did mention it before, but if you want to get into this hobby, these movements are a fine place to start. You can also start with a cheaper modern movement that's been made. And you need some basic tools for it. I actually have, I started a website where I curated toolkits for people to get into the hobby, and then even some for people that are a little further down the line, a little more advanced with it. Because it's really daunting. It's a crazy space to try to get into. You know, which screwdrivers do you buy? Which tweezers do you need? You know, where do you need to spend the money to get the quality stuff versus where can you go, you know what, this one I'll actually do just fine and won't cost me quite as much. It's a very daunting thing. And I wanted to make it easier for people because I think this hobby is awesome. It's very rewarding. You get to touch history. You can restore watches from eBay or for your friends, and it's really rewarding to do so. In many ways. So anyway, the website is called sutcliffehansen.com. I started it with my friend Alex, and there's a link down below. You can see the toolkits that we have and stuff if you want to try out the hobby for yourself. All right. Yeah. See, this is just again, I'm looking back now going, what is this? How does this thing go together? And I think that this yoke just comes off. Yeah, it does. Okay. So that part is what actually engages with the sliding clutch, and then this part slides back and forth. And this is just the mental notes that you need to take when you work on a movement that you haven't worked on before. That's it. That's all I'm doing there. And you get used to it over time. You really do. You see the similarities, and your brain starts to be able to go, okay, that's that part. It's not where I normally would see it, but I know what that one is. All right, everything's going to go into the baskets now, and that's going to be put into the watch cleaning machine for a thorough cleaning. I don't know when the last time this movement was serviced was. It wasn't too bad. You know, like I've seen a lot worse than that, but it definitely is in need of a service. Now, the other thing it needs is a crystal. And so I'm going to use my calipers here to measure the inside diameter of this bezel, and then I can order it. So it's 33.2 millimeters, and I'm going to order one bigger, one exactly that size, and one smaller, just so to make sure that I get the right one. Now we can put everything into the watch cleaning machine. And funny enough, this watch cleaning machine is much newer than the watch. This thing is, probably made, I think, in the 40s, maybe something like that. And as you can see, it goes through three-step process plus a drying cycle as well. This one's the cleaning, and this will get every single one of the parts sparkly and clean, just like new. Now, while the parts are clean, and I want to mention, I have a Patreon for my channel. This is a place where you can go to support your favorite content creators. And I have one for this channel as well. So if you like what I'm doing here, if you like my channel, that's the way you can go support me directly. And it's easy. There's no commitments on Patreon. You can come, you can go, you can choose how much you want to give. You can lower it, raise it anytime you want for any reason. You don't need to explain anything as far as that goes. There's no commitment there. And it's a well-established, it's been around for about 10 years now. So, you know that you can trust it. It's also cool because you get a thank you card and a Wristwatch Revival sticker in the mail, no matter what level you're at. We also need to clean the case, however, as well as the bezel and stuff. And for that, I'm going to use my Ultrasonic Cleaner here. So this just has a detergent in it, and this will use ultrasonic waves to go through the water with the detergent to clean off any debris or anything that's been stuck on to this case, but without doing it abrasively, right? That's the thing you want to avoid with stuff like this. Like you could polish a case like this, but this is a plated case. If you overdo it with the polish, you will break through the gold into the brass underneath, and now you got a disaster on your hands. So you got to be careful, and the Ultrasonic's perfect. Here's what the movement looks like, all cleaned up, laid out, and ready to go. It's quite a few parts actually, but yeah, not too bad, and certainly not something that we can't tackle here. Taking a look at the case as well after it's come out of the Ultrasonic, it cleaned up beautifully, actually. I have to say, this case is in good shape. This may have been my friend's, like his relative's, like fancy pocket watch, like the one he didn't bring out all the time, not the everyday one. All right, now let's take a look at this dial. I think we can do some improvement on this dial. I'm going to use just some water to clean it off. Remember, there was that hair on there, and these types of dials, there's really big upsides and really big downsides. The really big upside is that, like, they are extremely resilient. Like, I can do this. This isn't paint on top. This is enamel. So I can be really good about getting it clean. The downside is that they crack. So if you take a look here, do you see that crack along the side? This is extreme. There is the crack there, and then the one going from 9 to 11 there as well. This is really, really common. And I heard online, Yes, that is what you think it is. That is Denture Cleaner. I read numerous times that people had really good results using Denture Cleaner on these type of dials to clean out those cracks so that you can basically not see them anymore. Because the idea is that since enamel is effectively glass, the crack is so thin that the only reason you could see it is because some dirt got in there, not because there's actually a separation big enough to see. So let's see if this works. I put it through its denture cleaning. It feels a little weird to use this, but let's see what the result is. Holy smokes. Wow. Like it looks actually like the crack is gone. I suppose if I really, really look, I could sort of see the outline, but not really. Like at a glance, you would not see that anymore. That is amazing. Wow. Like I said, I read from numerous sources, by the way, ones that I trust, that said that this actually works, but that even exceeded my expectations for that. That was incredible. Wow. All right. Well, the dial looks really good, and that means that we can start putting this watch back together. Now, there's decisions that need to be made if you're a thoughtful watchmaker about what you want to do with the restoration. So the first one we have to make here is, do we use the original mainspring? And in this case, I decided, yes, we are going to use the original mainspring. It's in okay shape. It's probably a little tired, as we call it. It's also the old type of mainspring, which isn't as good as the new one. But this is not a watch, that my friend is going to be carrying around and relying on for day-to-day timekeeping. This is a family heirloom that he'll probably like to take out, wind up, have it run, and enjoy every once in a while. And so, in my opinion, it's better to keep it original so that it's as close to it was when his family member had this watch as well. And that means, prioritizing, originality a little bit over performance. And that's fine. There are some watches that I fixed on the channel where that wasn't the case, where I said, you know what, this isn't a super sentimental or historical piece. It isn't from the 1800s like this watch. So, I'm going to replace the mainspring. Or, for example, if this mainspring was broken, I would replace it, because I would say having a running watch does usurp the idea of having the all original. And I would give my friend the original part in a bag as well, just if he ever wanted to put it back to fully original. So in this case, I'm going to stick with the original mainspring. And that's going to be kind of how I dictate my decisions as we go through this restoration. So first thing that I want to do is try to get this weird keyless works set up. And again, this is where it's outside of my comfort zone a little bit. And so I have to do a little bit of trial and error. Like, for example, I didn't actually lubricate the posts before doing this. And because my mind was trying to figure out, all right, well, where does this thing actually need to go? But now I figured that out and lubricated the post. So we're kind of working, and it looks like this spring below, let's see. I think yeah, there we go. So it actually catches a post on the bottom of that part so that it creates tension. And then I can put this, I don't know what it's called, a slider bar thing in place. And I figured out how it works and why it's designed this way. And that's because there's that long, thin pin that I had to put in first. And when you manipulate the crown, when you pull out the crown, it actually pushes that pin forward, which then slides this whole assembly down and engages the motion works, the setting part of the watch, right? The one where you can change the hands by using the crown. And by the way, we do call this the keyless works on a watch. I think this spring actually needs to go over this post if I'm not. Yeah, like, I gotta be careful. I really don't want to break this spring. Okay, there we go. There we go. Yeah, just like that. And, again, these are called the keyless works because even older versions of pocket watches actually use the key. You can still find those, and you would put it into the back of the watch and twist it to change the hands. But at some point they decided that having an extra key that you can lose or that might wear out or doesn't fit properly at some point is a bit of an annoyance. And so they designed, a keyless system where you pull the top of the crown, set the hands, push it back down, and the hands are set. And of course, we still use that system on wristwatches as well to this day because There actually are a couple of wristwatches that have a keyed system, but they're almost always like an homage. They're like a throwback to the old pocket watches. That's not a thing that people are interested in, having to carry an extra little key just for their watch anymore. Okay, so now we can very carefully set the train of wheels into place. A little bit of medium viscosity oil is needed here on the center wheel. For keen-eyed viewers who have been watching my videos for a while, you'll also notice some places where there aren't jewels. The kind of standard jewel number to have all of the pivots jeweled properly is 17. You can go above that if you want to jewel some areas that are even less friction. But this one's 11, and that means that there's numerous places on this movement where there is no jewel at all. And that means that it's metal on metal. It can work. As you can see, this thing is still, well built and sturdy, but you'd prefer to have a jewel bearing rather than a metal on metal when possible. But it costs more. It's harder to manufacture. This would be like a mid-range movement, not like a super high-end one for its time, but not like the bottom of the barrel. Okay, now let's see if we can get the train wheel bridge in place. As you can see, there's actually 4 pivots that we need to line up all simultaneously. The center wheel, third wheel, fourth wheel, as well as the escape wheel. And that can be a bit of a finicky business. Oh, almost. You can see movement down the train wheel, maybe just a little tweak here. Yes, that's what we want to see. There we go. Yeah, and you want to see that kind of smooth running. And remember, this is before we've even oiled the watch at all, too. So, we've got that going for us as well. If it's already running smooth-ish, then that's a good sign. As you can see, I'm also really careful to use this stick here to make sure that I hold down that bridge while I screw it into place, because I tell you, you don't want it to shift and then you screw it down. You can easily break one of those pivots. All right, now I can use a sturdy pair of tweezers to put on the cannon pinion after a little bit of lubrication there as well. Same thing here. This is medium viscosity oil on these posts just to make sure everything runs smoothly. You can see I keep my oil in a little oiler where each one has its own little cup, and then it has a little lid on top that you can close when you're not using it, just to keep any dust or debris out of the oil. It's pretty important that the oil is clean. You also change out that oil frequently for that same reason, just that, like, if it's been exposed to the air numerous times, it probably starts to collect a little bit of dust or debris, and that's, of course, kind of the opposite of what you're trying to do with the oil. This is another shouldered screw here for this intermediate wheel. And that's why it receives a little bit of lubrication there too. And sometimes it's a little bit too much. As you can see, a little bit came out from around the screw. And so I'll use a piece of Rodico. That's that kind of blue silly putty stuff. If you've ever used blue tack, the stuff to like hang posters on the wall, it's very similar to that. And it is shockingly useful. I use it for like a bunch of different stuff working on a watch. That's one of them, cleaning up little bits of oil. You can also use it to clean up dials and hands. You can use it to hold parts while you work on them. You can use it to hold parts while you look at them, like on a microscope, because sometimes it's hard to get a metal part to kind of sit upright, so you can put on a little bit of Rodico. You can use Rodico to pick up small parts. Little tiny screws that are recessed a little bit. You can't really get a screwdriver or tweezers in there to actually grab them. And you don't want to be using magnetism around a watch like this. So Rodico ends up being kind of the perfect tool for the job in many cases. Now take a look here. This is the pivot hole for the pallet fork. And as you can see, there's no jewel on it, as I was just mentioning. And it looks to me to be just like a little bit worn. So I'm actually going to use a smoothing broach, is what it's called, to just clean it out a little bit and maybe resurface that inside just a little bit. And these are kind of interesting because they're absolutely tiny. They have to be for the size of hole that we're dealing with here. But as you can see, there's a few different sizes and shapes here. And they've got kind of a broad base that you can put into a pin vise. And then the smoothing broach is like a hardened material that you can use. And so here it is in a pin vise. And if I can line it up properly, yes, just like that, I can just go back and forth, and this should just gently smooth out the inside of that pivot hole, and that will make things run just every little bit smoother. And this is something you can do. Take a look. See how it looks a little cleaner now on the inside? I think that's a good improvement. And I think I'm going to do that for the top and bottom here as well. Now we can replace the pallet fork itself, as we've gotten a good chunk of the way through this restoration already. This is a pallet fork bridge. It goes on top and holds the pallet in place. Interestingly, you can see the top of it actually does have a jewel, so I won't need to do any broaching on that. It's only the bottom pivot that isn't jeweled. Seems weird to me. It is a reasonable place to not have a jewel because the pallet fork actually doesn't spin. It just goes back and forth a little tiny bit. So the amount of friction that it produces is actually quite a bit lower than the wheels that are spinning freely or spinning a lot more. Okay, so let's try to put on the balance and see if this thing will run again for us. Again, this is with no lubrication, so we're just hoping that it kicks up and goes. Ha, just like that. Very nice. Yeah, this is a good movement. This thing really wants to run, you can tell. And I can put on the screw for the balance bridge here. Wow, this thing's great. I love this watch. It's beautiful. It runs well. It's eager to go. Very, very nice. Let's put it on the microscope now, and we can start oiling up the jewel. So the first one that we'll do here is the center wheel, and we're going to use this red oil, which is a medium viscosity oil. And as you can see, you just grab a little tiny bit. And this is, again, I'm using this slightly thicker oil for these larger pivots that aren't jeweled. And for the ones that have jewels, I'll use this oil, which is a thinner oil. It's called 9010. And you just don't need very much, just a little bit like that'll work. And yeah, that's Rodico there, by the way, again, that I that I use to clean off the oiler. It really is kind of the do-all. And again, just a little tiny bit of oil there. You don't need to even fill up that entire cup. In fact, you don't want to. You want the oil to kind of be suspended between the jewel and the pivot. And if you put too much in, it'll actually run down the pivot and drain the part that's supposed to be oiled. Now, there are challenges working on older pocket watches, and this is one of them. The balance itself, it needs to be completely disassembled to service it. Now, on a modern watch movement with a shock protection system, you get two really great things with a shock protection system. One of them is the shock protection, but the other one is that when the watch is being serviced, it gives you access to these jewels without having to remove the entire balance and disassemble the entire balance. But back in the day, in the 1800s, early 1900s, when these watches were being made, this is how you have to do it. So, but it's part of the process, and you have to build up your confidence with it, because it is a little bit intimidating working around probably the most sensitive part of the watch, the spring, the balance spring, and that kind of stuff. But, once you get used to it, it's okay. So I take off those screws, and then what that allows me to do is push out the jewel assembly, which is two parts, and there they are, and they'll fall down to the bench, no problem. And then I can clean them up individually, and I can use a solvent. I'm going to use one called One Dip here, and that basically is made to dissolve any oil or debris that's left on the jewel and leave us with a perfectly clean surface to put new oil, and then we can reassemble the assembly. Now, just to make sure, I'm going to use a little bit of pegwood here to clean off the top of that jewel and give it one more rinse in the One Dip. That's a manual cleaning process that just assures that there's no debris or dried on oil that's left over on there. So now that we've got those clean, we can use, that's right, another little bit of Rodico here to kind of reset how we're going to put this thing back together. So the whole jewel goes in first, and that's HOLE. So this actually has the hole that the pivot will go into, and it gets put into the balance first. And that part doesn't get lubricated directly. You actually lubricate the part that goes on top, which is called the cap jewel. And that doesn't have a hole in it. It's a flat jewel that sits right on top like a sandwich on the hole jewel. And what it'll do is I'll take a little bit of this 9010 that I was using before, and I'll put it right in the center of this cap jewel. And then I'll replace the cap jewel on top, and it will squish that oil between and suspend it right where that pivot lines up. And that will keep that oil sitting right where it needs to be so that this watch can not only run well, but run for a long time. These are always a little bit of a pain. They're little tiny screws that you have to get lined up just right. But if you've got the right tools for the job, it's not too bad. And, you know, this is the kind of thing where you can use a loop. A microscope can be used in these scenarios, but it actually is a little bit more difficult to work under a microscope when you're trying to screw down a screw that is directly above. It can be difficult to see. Okay, so now the last thing we need to do is to replace the balance assembly back onto the balance bridge. And this is done by using this little stud here and that thing right there. If I can just push that into the hole, then there's a screw that comes in from the side and just nudges up against it to hold it in place. And here I can now, yes, carefully put that screw back into place. Now, before we put that back in, as you may imagine, these pivots have a top and a bottom. And so we need to now service the other side in the same fashion that we did this one. Now, this one is a little bit different because it's directly into the main plate here. Oh, and by the way, there's Rodico to pick up a screw. Good example of what I was talking about. And with those out of the way, I can now push this jewel assembly. Again, it's the same thing, 2 jewels out of the way, and they'll just pop down to the bench. But yeah, since these are actually put into the bottom of the main plate, it is a little bit easier to get them in and out, generally speaking, because the main plate's much more sturdy than the balance bridge. Okay, and once again, we need to repeat this same process. So we'll put the hole jewel in first, and then we'll put the cap jewel in with the lubrication that I just put onto it on top of that. Again, I'm just going to use this stick or whatever tool you'd like to make sure that it's seated flat. You don't want it to be at an angle because the pivot needs to engage with that pivot hole perfectly, right? You don't want it to be crooked. It will slow things down dramatically. But we can get it mostly seated all the way, and then we can put the screws on. And then as we screw down the screws, the housing there will sort of flatten itself out into place as well. And it's just a process, you do a little bit here and then a little bit there, and it just sort of flattens itself out, like I said. And then you've got that lubrication sitting there as well. Okay, and with that done, now we can put the balance back on. And once we get it into place, we can actually throw this thing on the Timegrapher and see what kind of readout we get. The Timegrapher is a tool that we use to measure some of the important parts about how the watch is running so that we know what we need to change to make sure that it's running, the best that we can get it. As you can see, though, the movement kicks right back up again, and that's to be expected. It was running before, and we now have lubrication, which really does help, especially on these old movements. Okay, let's take a look at it on the Timegrapher and see how it does. Ooh. So there's a bunch of concerning things here. Mainly it's the readout, though. Those should be dots that are kind of flat. And after looking at it under the microscope, I noticed that it looks like the post on the pallet fork might be slightly rubbing against that roller surface there. And that could be causing this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to very slightly bend that post back just to make sure that it can clear that. I don't want to do this too much because it still needs to grab, but maybe just a little tweak. Yeah, just something like that might do it. And then on top of it, I also, again, busted out the microscope to look around, and I'll show you what I found. Because I also found that when I did reassemble this balance, I made a mistake. So do you see right there where that spring is on the inside of those 2 posts? That spring coil needs to be between those 2 posts. Otherwise, it can kind of bang around and you can't adjust the watch. And that could have been the reason why our reading was so erratic. So what I have to do is just take out that post once again. Again, that's the stud that holds it into place. And then I can move this spring over carefully with my tweezers. This spring it's called a hairspring because it's so freaking thin that if you just bump it wrong, it bends. Yeah, see, I want that to be in between those two. Oh, nope. I missed again. This is very fine work. I'm on a microscope here, as you can see. There we go. I want that to be inside of those two posts like that. See, and that's actually the regulator pins. That's how you determine or how you adjust whether the watch is running fast or slow. Basically, those pins move along that line and create either a longer or shorter spring, depending on whether you want the watch to run slower or faster. All right, so now it is running again. And let's see if our tweaks give us a better readout on the Timegrapher. I'm really hoping so, because this is kind of testing the limits of what I know. Much better. As you can see, it's keeping really good time. Now, the amplitude is pretty low at 156. You'd hope that would be above 200, but that's likely a consequence of my decision to use the old mainspring. I think if we put a brand new mainspring in there, we would see an even higher amplitude. But again, I'm prioritizing originality here over that. It's similar with the beat error. The beat error on this was around 6 milliseconds off, and you'd rather have that be on an old watch like this, you know, under 2, under 1 would be kind of where you'd want as close to 0 as you can get. But I'm going to make an executive decision here because adjusting the beat error is a time-consuming and finicky and potentially risky process, and I don't think it's worth it in this case. So I'm going to leave it as is, and I'm fine with that for a watch like this. For a wristwatch that is meant to be worn every day, I wouldn't be. But for a family heirloom piece like this, that's more about enjoying having the object and having it in your hands rather than its like ultimate performance, I think that's the right decision to make. Okay, we can put the hands back on now. As you can see, there's your blued hands. They're beautiful. Bluing is a process. There's 2 different ways to do it, but the way they did it back in the day here was they would heat the hands up in a little pile of brass shavings. And as steel will turn different colors, it'll turn kind of a light wheat color, and it'll also turn a deep blue, it'll turn a purple, and then it'll turn kind of a black. And if you pull it off at just the right time, you'll get that beautiful blued look. Okay, now we can case up this watch, put it back into its case. Again, we already cleaned the case and it's looking really nice. These screws on the side here are screws that hold the movement inside the case and keep it nice and flat. Now we also need to replace the crystal on this watch. And again, I ordered a new one. I ordered a really flat one. You can get different shapes of crystals. Some of them are very flat. Some of them are more domed or taller. Some of them have a step. And even more, some of them have like a tension ring on the bottom for divers watches and stuff. This is about the flattest one that you can get because with a watch case that closes on top, you really don't have any wiggle room there. So I'm going to install it into the bezel first. And that looks good to me. Now I can use my air blower here just to make sure that there's no debris. And then this thing should just click into place. Yeah, just like that. Pretty easy. And I think we're done. Yeah, it looks like it closes up just fine. And this thing is finished. Wow, that was nice. This thing definitely required a little bit of TLC to get it running right, but it's running pretty well now and actually keeping amazing time, which of course is the most important metric there. But just as important in this case, it's looking really good. I mean, look how beautiful this watch is. This watch was made, 140 years ago, and it looks fantastic. And I hope my friend can enjoy having the family heirloom back in his hands. That's going to do it for this video. I just wanted to say thank you so much for hanging out with me. I really appreciate that you take the time to go on this journey with me. I know it's my weird little hobby, but I'm glad you're here with me. If you want to find me on Instagram, I'm wristwatch_revival. I'd love to say hi to you over there. I'll post whenever I post a video and some in-between project stuff as well. And with that, we'll see you next time.